Welcome to Anther Dish, the show about food, culture, and identity. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Dugnan. When it comes to Caribbean food, there tends to be this viewpoint that it can be a monolithic culinary experience. And particularly as those living in countries like Jamaica, Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, Bahamas, or other Caribbean countries move into the diaspora, it necessitates a nuanced look at how culinary traditions and knowledges are shared, shifted, and expanded with new generations. My guest today, Chef Leigh-Ann Martin, reminds us that there is such a rich regional diversity and abundance that needs to be explored more fully. Leigh-Ann is a trained chef, thought leader, and senior administrative professional based in the New York City area. She has worked at top finance and accounting firms and continues her corporate career while consulting on the coursework for the No Words Project, or being featured in food media such as the New York Times, Eater, Washington Post, Food Insider, Vittles, and Hungry Society podcast. Leigh-Ann has contributed meaningful words that echo Caribbean abundance and delicious recipes for Well Entertaining, Ark Republic, Cooking Sense, and Tenderly magazine. She worked as a line cook at Butter Restaurant and the Derby Supper Club upon her graduation from culinary school and launched A Table for Four in 2018. This pop-up is an intimate dinner series that merges her Trini upbringing with her culinary training. More recently, Leigh-Ann was invited to lead a workshop by the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley, California, and has served on the board of the Kind Kitchen Group, which aims to drive social change through food, education, and community empowerment. In today's conversation, we explore her upbringing in Trinidad and its lasting influences on how she thinks about ingredient sourcing and culinary experiences, the navigation of personal and collective histories in creating tasting menus, and breaking down the myth of a singular Caribbean culinary foodway. I've long admired the work that Leigh-Ann is doing, so I'm particularly thrilled to have her on the podcast this week. Here's my conversation with Leigh-Ann. All right, welcome to the show, Leigh-Ann. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Sarah?
I'm good. I'm so thrilled to be able to connect with you today.
Same here.
So before we dive in, do you mind sharing a bit of background about who you are, where you're coming in from today, and the type of work that you do?
Sure. My name is Leigh-Ann Martin, born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago. I reside in New Jersey. I've been living here for going on 20 years, kind of equal parts of when I left Trinidad when I was 21. So I'm 41 this year. So I am almost like half of my life in Trinidad and half my life in New Jersey. I am a trained chef with about 13 years experience working in commercial kitchens. Once upon a time, food blogger. I would write for my own, create content for my own food blog. And also for I would do content for this publication based out in Barbados, as well as, the one time I did a couple of things for some independent publishing within the US. I like to think of myself as a full food writer.
Yeah.
And of course, my time curating and cooking for pop-up dinners, specifically the pop-up dinner that I hosted in my apartment once upon a time called The Table for Four. My other life, I've always had a corporate background. So I am a senior executive assistant within a bunch of different industries, public accounting, finance, biopharm. So, it's just another person sort of working on pushing operational excellence along, So yes, that's me.
Amazing. I'm so excited to dive into this all too, because it's just, there's so much to your story, and I know we've connected online, so to be able to actually get into it is really exciting as well.
Yeah.
So I want to kickstart by looking at some of the foods, ingredients, or dishes that you grew up with, and what are the ones that really speak to your experience, and how did they shape you to get into cooking?
Sure. I think there's a bunch of ingredients that I kind of hold dear to my heart when it comes to the experience of growing up in the Caribbean, growing up in an island. Rice being one of them, ground provision, of course, because of, what's being grown from the land. The land is very, fertile. So you have like a bunch of lovely fruits and seasonal vegetables. So it's kind of like whatever you could make out of these things. So, for instance, mango, you could have it raw from the tree, preserved, cooked, So the types of mangoes that I would have, the rice dishes that you would have would be those that we that have a baseline recipe to them. Those that you're just trying to make dinner with. I really do love any sort of leafy green any sort of leafy green with a coconut milk, with a meat, with
Oh,
a
yeah.
rice, I'm all in for it. I really do love to some of the sweets that we grew up eating. They were very traditional, very easy, no fluff, just like a sugar, whatever meat or puree from the fruit or whatever we were using, a flavoring, and then it'd be cooked or boiled until, really dark or blackened, and then, you have it like that. I think I am very much team coconut milk because I think there's so much that we do with the coconut. And then, of course, like any sort of meat or, cured fish, smoked fish. I'm very much an improv cook. So I like to have and I think that's a way that I grew up as well too. My grandmother, when she would go to the market on a weekly basis, it's whatever she could afford,
Hmm.
whatever was available, whatever, was on a good price, whatever was seasonal. So now sometimes I'm like, I start with whatever I have on hand, whatever is in the fridge, whatever is in the cabinet, whatever's in the grocery store, whatever I feel like. So I'm very much an improv type of person in the kitchen where I just kind of let the ingredient kind of lead to what the end menu is going to be. So I have groups of ingredients that I remember from growing up in Trinidad that's kind of made me the person that I am when I think about creating menus, making dinner, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea of like framing it as groupings of ingredients too, because I mean, I know we've talked about it too, but this is very much how I cook too, of like, well, it's never going to be the same dish. It's going to be whatever's on hand,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
And I think that's lovely, right? I think,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard because sometimes I create something and I was like, oh, that was banging.
Yeah.
I wish I wrote it down. Like, I really wish I wrote it down. Just because, like, I'm not in that stage of my life where I am creating anymore. Right now, I'm just a consumer.
Mm.
So when I'm cooking, I'm just like, oh, I really should have written that down. But when I was, creating, I would have to force myself, even within the process, even right after the process of writing things down and saying, well, okay, this is what I would tweak. These are some of the seasonal changes that I could make, moving forward. And these are some of the things. And even with writing it down, sometimes it'll be just a loose record of it, but at least I have it written down. But also, I think with the type of ingredients that I've listed, I think it's also lovely to just kind of, and I know we say this and some people really dismiss it, but sometimes it's really good to go off your vibe. Not every
Yeah.
time I'm going to be cooking for a table for four. Not every time I'm going to be cooking for an army. Not every time I'm going to be cooking only for myself. So what does that look like? And I have the ability to do that, so I just take advantage of it.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I'm teaching my daughter to cook a little bit, and we bake a lot, which is very measured and a lot more structured. And trying to teach intuition to someone who's very mathematical is really challenging in some cases, because to say, oh, just kind of go with it, like taste it and see how you feel, it's a skill that I think goes undersung as well.
Yeah. I think not methodical in like any way, but I do enjoy structure. And being in the kitchen, I look at structure differently. I don't
Mm.
look at it as being so robotic where you're only like, well, 2 tablespoons of this, 3 tablespoons of that, a half pound of this, a half pound of that. I really think about, okay, so how am I allowing the flame to, like, what's the volume that it's at? How much water do I have to put in? How much time do I have to put in there? Let me allow certain things to kind of develop flavor on its own before I go in and add, salt, or add fish sauce, or add this into it. Sometimes at the end of it, I'll be like, you know what? It tastes good, but it's missing something. What is the something? Is it an acid? Is it a salt? What am I looking for? And then, I'm not sure if you looked at my last Instagram post where I was like, the flavors from plantain, I'm really struggling to like get that natural
Yeah.
flavor. So sometimes it's like, well, okay, the natural flavors that I thought was going to come through isn't. So then what are some of the additives that I have to put in to kind of like bring out what I'm looking for? So those are some of the things that I think about. All to say, when I'm in the kitchen, I'm pretty serious. I'm
Yeah.
really thinking of making sure I'm not going to burn my kitchen down.
Yeah, fair.
And, thinking about the developing of the flavors, the doneness that I'm looking for, what am I trying to convey, the feeling. Cooking for me is less about, well, it is because I love to eat, but it's more about the feelings and some of the unspoken things that are conveyed through food. Yeah.
Totally. And that's such a craft that is precise in its own way. Like it's
Yeah.
hard to measure, but it's such a complete experience when
Yeah.
someone is at the peak of their game with that. So I'm curious, like, when you went to culinary school and got your start in cooking, what were some of the, takeaways from those earlier years in terms of like shaping or adding or kind of expanding to how you cooked?
Before I went to culinary school, I think I started the informal training, just being in the kitchen with my mother. She kind of forcing me in the kitchen, understanding how to run a house and the home economics of it all. So, moving into the formal training, well, even before the formal training, my mother was a cook in a mess hall. So there were certain principles that
Mm.
she would bring home and just be around, me, just creating dishes and running the kitchen and going to the market and things like that. And then the formal part of training was understanding way more about the principles, understanding, of course, worldly cuisines and things like that, but really putting the why to what we do. One of the first things that I had to learn going into culinary school was how to create food. And this is so basic, but how to create food without using like seasoning packets.
Oh, yeah.
Leaving Trinidad, we relied not, and it's wild because my grandmother didn't use,
Mm.
season packets, but we just ended up using them. So in the first couple, weeks of being in culinary school, I had to wean myself off of using these sort of season packets that we, just became popular and we were using all the times. And I really had to think about a salt, a acid, the texture, the cooking process. How are we doing these things to really bring out the flavor instead of just dumping in a seasoned packet and just expecting it to taste good? So that was one of the first things that I had to unlearn going into culinary school. And then
Mm.
culinary school again just really formalized, the techniques and, me saying, so I did this before I didn't know that there was a name to it, You
Yeah.
just did it because, your grandmother did it, or my mother, she knew it because of, the people she cooked for and things like that. So it's really formalizing the technique, putting language to it, understanding what it takes to really cook a la minute, understanding the kitchen, the commercial kitchen in a different way. Especially for me, having a corporate background, I have a lot of transferable skills.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the operations experience that I have really did come in handy when I was thinking about setting up my station, how to really have it be effective and cook it in like, cooking and when we have orders coming in and things like that. So some of the early days of culinary school was really lovely. It really showed me not to necessarily be recipe driven and to be ingredient driven.
Mm.
That was a very lovely way of kind of having me think differently instead of, well, wait, you have this ingredient and this is the only way you're going to do certain things. It just really totally had me thinking differently about how to really utilize ingredients. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because I feel like that also, I mean, from what I've read of your cooking, I can't speak to it, but from what I've read, it's very ingredient focused and ingredient
Yeah.
driven as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I think I uh, when I was doing my pop-ups, and I make it extremely clear that I'm doing, Trinidadian, Trinbagonian inspired food. It's always been sort of, what do I have on hand first? What do they have in the green market? What am I trying to convey? It's less about, this dinner, I'm going to make this. No, it's always been less about that and more about, okay, so today, these are the people that I have coming. This is sort of the dietary restrictions that they've shared with me. This is what I think they would enjoy, or this is what I really want to work on perfecting? Yeah,
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 which
yeah,
feels more intimate too, right? Like you're speaking directly to the very people that you're cooking for instead of this like mass approach to it.
yeah. As much as I enjoyed working in the restaurants, it gave me the experience that I didn't have. Before culinary school, I didn't have a cooking or culinary resume. So while I was going to culinary school, I was volunteering as much as I could just to, gain the experience. So when I graduated and was working in the kitchen, it was really sort of me being heads down and doing what I had to do because we were all on one team. So at the end of it, what's on the scorecard was,
Yeah.
how much covers we have at the night, making sure things are healthy, making sure there's, compliance with what we do and things like that. But I express to people that my sweet spot is, to cook for a group of like 20 or less. And my sweet spot is to cook for 4 people.
Ah, I love that.
I like really cooking for like a little bit of, yeah. I know
Yeah.
sometimes that may not be like the most popular because, coming from the Caribbean, it's very, we come from communal eating, communal celebration, eating in that way. But I do enjoy just being able to cook for like 4 people or like 5 people and just, everyone just coming over
Wow.
and just having informal sort of thing and not having like too much of the rowdiness and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't know if
different types.
everybody want to hear that, but it's true.
I mean, there's the time for the rowdy, and then there's the time for the
Yeah,
like sweet spot table
yeah,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, in terms of, when you started creating the Table for Four pop ups, can you speak to how those help to explore and connect with your ancestral foods as a chef, and how you approached crafting these dinners in terms of like interweaving both your personal
Mhm.
stories and Trini culture more broadly as well?
So before I started the Table for Four pop-up in my apartment, after I graduated culinary school, I always thought that I would pitch to my alma mater, ICE Institute in New York, that I would pitch to them a curriculum for recreational Caribbean cooking classes. So I've always worked on very loose recreational curriculum. So I've always had sort of themed menus, in my drives or in a dock somewhere. So I've always had those sort of sitting there because I always thought I wanted to get into recreational cooking, instructing recreational cooking
Mm.
classes, that is. So I've always had that. And then again, before the my Table for Four pop-up, I was not a stranger to having pop-ups in the city. So, and again, before the pop-up, I wasn't working in public accounting anymore. So I had a little bit more time to really focus on how I wanted to continue defining my story. So I was looking at places in the city and I was like, you know what? I just want to cook. I just
Mm.
want to cook. And I wanted to get all the things going around in my head. I just wanted to have it out. So when I decided to do the Table of Four pop up, and before that, again, I was blogging. So I was able to use those in my area from my mailing list, reach out to people in my area to see if they would be interested in attending. Because I was having it in my home and I didn't want to post it to the public,
Fair.
I used my mailing list from my food blog to really target people that would be interested in coming.
Mm.
I never published my menus because I didn't want people coming with preconceived thoughts of what they were getting. I just made sure that I respected any dietary restrictions that they would have. And in the curation back then, I wanted to have people dine in a way that I wanted to dine. So that was potentially with strangers, potentially having something that I've never had before in a way that I've never had it before. And then also too, I think people love exclusivity.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
being able to like come and just have, a very sort of secret society of it all and just like have
Yeah.
dinner like in someone's kitchen. And also I wanted to get practice in public speaking and I wanted to then kind of drawing data from the people that were coming to the dinners, right? I wanted to not only have them experience my cooking and me working on the craft, but I wanted to understand some of the takeaways they were having, their experience with, food that they probably never had or probably they thought they didn't like,
Mm.
and the feeling that they were left with, not only from the dining experience, but with, say, that main ingredient that they never had or they thought they didn't like and things like that. And some of the conversations that came out of the table for four, especially those that were just all four strangers. Now, in forming the menus, I utilized the themed menus that I created from the curriculums that I wrote. I refreshed them because, not saying that they were dated, I just wanted them to speak to more towards who I was now. Again, sort of defining my own story as I go.
Yeah.
And then what I also did was, according to who I reached out to and who bought the tickets and understanding some of their dietary restrictions, I was able to then create menus based off certain dietary restrictions, be it vegan, be it vegetarian, and really showcase the diversity on, how I've eaten in Trinidad, some of the things that you would not associate with island cooking and Trinidadian cooking and things like that. And also, again, just really showing people that although we're living in the tri-state area, these are some of the things that you could create and not having to remix it or not having to, put a hyphen in between it and not make it into
Yeah.
something that it really isn't. It's just me trying to represent where I lived and who I am and make it, a healthy, good plate of food for everyone that came. So there's a lot of components that came into me starting the table for four and and things kind of leading up to it. But one of the high reasons was I just wanted to cook.
Yeah.
I just wanted to cook. I feel like when I was in public accounting, now I loved my time in public accounting. And when I was working in public accounting was when I couldn't work in the restaurants anymore. I just didn't have
Right.
that sort of time. So that's when I was really blogging. I would blog and take pictures before I went to work. I would write on my lunch break. I would print stuff. I was doing the most. But
It speaks to me though. It really does.
even when I was doing my pop-ups, oh God, I was printing menus on Friday night. On lunch breaks, I would go down on lunch breaks on Wednesday because my dinners were on Saturday. So on Fridays and on Wednesdays, I'll go to the Green Market, I'll go to Chelsea Market on my lunch breaks. I would get all the things. I was doing a lot. I really was. But yeah, so leading up to the pop-up, there's a lot of things that happened for me to be like, you know what? I'm just gonna run this pop-up out of my home in a way that feels good to me, hook in things that feels good to me. And I'm hoping that there would be a lovely takeaway of the offering, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like in terms of the experience for the guests themselves, did you find that that resonated with everyone?
Yeah, I think everyone was sort of waiting for me to kind of get back out there. And
Mm,
because I was blogging before and I did do a couple pop-ups within New York and Brooklyn before I started my table for four in my home, people were just waiting for me to just kind of get back out there. Because I live in New Jersey, I was like, oh, I don't know if people are going to want to come out to New Jersey, but they did.
cool. That's
I
great.
ran the pop-up twice a month. I ran it twice a month because that was my way of controlling food wastage.
Mm,
I ran the pop-up twice a month. I ran the menu for the entire month, so to cut down on food wastage. And then it ran for almost a year, most of the year.
wow.
So yeah, 2018,
Wow. That's
while
huge.
while I was working full time.
See, this is why we connect though, because I feel like I can't remember if you're Virgo or not.
I am a Virgo.
You are. Okay. Yeah. Because it's like the balancing of like the 9 to 5 and then the creative
Yes.
need to continue to foster something.
Yes.
It really speaks to me in terms of
Yes.
what you're saying there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a lovely time for me while I was sort of making and creating content and, you know, being outside and marketing my way in a different way. I think
Yeah.
in corporate, I didn't necessarily have to market myself in this way because, I was working for, larger companies where I was very much small fish, where I didn't have to do certain things. But when I was cooking for myself and trying to showcase my talents, it was very much different for me. And I was really working on, putting myself out there, putting the craft out there and kind of pushing it as much as I can. Again, trying to define the story of what I'm doing. Um, kind of getting language to the remembrance of home and what was once and who I am as a Trinidadian woman living in the US. And, just kind of understanding what am I doing to kind of push the food culture further. And I think that's the lovely thing about sort of the evolution of things, right? Is the
Hmm.
welcoming of voices and kind of what are they saying to kind of push the culture along. So I thought that's kind of what I was doing.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And I'm curious if you could speak a bit more to, like the diasporic experience, because I know you've talked about before looking at like the struggle with looking at desirable versus undesirable cuts of meat and
Yeah,
how people interact with those. So can you speak
yeah,
a bit to, how that's navigated
yeah.
for yeah.
So I think when we look at desirable versus undesirable, I think we have to kind of interrogate some of the recipes that are being lost
Yeah.
because we come from a culture that we utilized everything, and that meaning like the awful the more undesirable cuts of meat and things like that. And not saying that these things aren't, we're still not using them today, but I think sometimes we have to think about some of the default language and default cooking methods around them, right?
Hmm.
So for instance, if I say, hey, I'm cooking this, and it automatically in your brain there's some default language or default cooking methods that you didn't like or you prefer not to eat, you're automatically going to say no to it, right? But I think the lovely thing about really not necessarily being recipe driven and being ingredient driven is understanding how you could utilize this particular ingredient. So I think that's one way that we have to kind of get away from desirable versus undesirable, is not automatically going to some of the default language and default cooking methods around them. And also when it comes to some of the undesirable cuts of meat, there are some defaulted cooking methods, recipes that we revere, that we enjoy. One way is being like, pickled fish and pickled meats. We love that.
Yeah.
A lot of Caribbean countries do have some version of a pickled meat that just happens to be sort of a cut of meat that's more gelatinous. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's how do we move about making sure that these sort of recipes like are carried on as we evolve, as we think about what's the distinctions with Caribbean islands and the uniqueness and pushing the food culture along. Like, are we keeping those sort of recipes alive? And I do think we should keep those recipes alive. It speaks towards resistance, it speaks towards sustainability, and I think it's very important. I think sometimes what ends up kind of clouding people is thinking it's a pride around certain desirable versus
Mhm.
undesirable, and I think we should really understand why we should have pride around these sorts of cuts of meats or these, sorts of organ meats and offals and things like that. There should definitely be pride with us having recipes based on utilizing those things. I'm not saying that everyone is going to like a gelatinous piece of, but
They might though if they tried
I
it, right?
love. But give it a chance, because I think also too, living in the tri-state area, we have the ability to see the same cut in different forms, be it
Mm.
from Asia, be it from Italy. So I think sometimes people are like, huh, I thought we were the only country using them, but no, you're
Uh,
not. So seeing other people utilizing, sometimes that pushes people to be like, well, I'll try it. I don't subscribe to the undesirable versus desirable. I think there's an evolution that happens, yes, and I think there is a way that we definitely should be preserving sort of heirloom recipes and recipes that we're accustomed using. And also too, there's like, the health benefits of these cuts and things
totally.
like that. So we should definitely keep that in mind as well too. Yeah.
Totally. Yes, I appreciate your thoughts on that because it's a point of deep interest for me right now in terms of like what's lost when you move to America or when you move to Canada, particularly in the knowledge and the craft that goes into a particular recipe and why
Yeah.
it's done that way and what that meant for your ancestors and what
Yes.
that means for you to carry that on or
Yeah.
like reclaim it as well.
Yes. And I think, that's not to say that the socioeconomics of Trinidad and Tobago never included ready-made stuff or grab and
Mm.
go. Like we've always imported. There's always been a high percentage of that within who we are. But we are a people that are accustomed cooking, long and slow methods, or, grilling and really utilizing everything, from the each part of the tree to each part of the animal. So I think it's interrogating some of these heirloom recipes and cooking methods and having more voices join in with the conversation as we push it along.
Mm.
And not being afraid to say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we eat, and this is the type of content, this is the type of food that I'm going to keep on making because this speaks towards who came before me, and this is what I'm going to continue showcasing. Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And also, as I
Yeah.
said, as much as I began and keep on sort of defining my story. Look, some of the countries in the Caribbean, they're still very young when it comes to when they gained independence, right?
Mm.
And after independence, they were able to then have like a national dish and things like that. So instead of us trying to distort the establishment of Caribbean countries and what they're trying to keep and what they're trying to say when it comes to their foodways, I think it's very important to not exclude some heirloom recipes and things of the past. I think it should definitely be a part of the journey as these countries still try to define their foodways and their food culture. I
Mm.
think that's very important. That's really what I'm trying to say.
That's so
I
good.
think, yes.
Yes. Okay.
And I think we have to remember that because, for instance, pickling meat. Most Caribbean countries, they have some form of a pickled meat, right? And in Trinidad, you may able to get that sort of pickled meat every day after a party, after a fete. But in Barbados, you could only get that sort of thing on a Saturday and, at a certain time. So I think some of the distinctions between what makes a country's foodways unique is very, very important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I want to talk a little more about that too, because I find, thinking specifically to Toronto, Jamaican food is such an important backbone to much of the culture that the city offers. But there's this tendency to go towards like a singular Caribbean foodway,
Yeah.
which obviously is not a thing. But
Yes.
why do you think this myth or approach to thinking about Caribbean food is maintained?
So I think when it comes to if you're able to create a menu, say for a storefront, and you're able to highlight some of the more popular dishes in certain, some popular dishes of certain Caribbean countries, by all means. However, I think we have a duty to ourselves and to the customer to really educate and show them and really speak about the distinction between the foodways of different countries. It's very important because every Caribbean island is different and the way that they would cook is different, their seasonality, the regional differences, of course. But I think we owe it to ourselves to really push and have people understand the distinction, because we have to remember that we really need to speak about the pride of each country differently. But when it comes to, creating a menu, calling it Caribbean, and highlighting some of the more popular dishes in some countries, I can't be against it, but I think we definitely need to showcase and be distinct on how we do that. And I think that's the important thing, because when we travel back to the Caribbean, we as the visitor can't look at one country as this homogenous way, because it's different. As I was saying with the pickled meat, you could have it. They're selling pickled meat in the grocery stores and all these things in one island, but in the other island, it's only on a Saturday you could get it. It's only between this time and this time. Certain people are going to be selling it. So you can't just be a visitor and assume that, okay, once you go to this island, they're going to give you everything that you're
Mm-hmm.
accustomed getting at this one restaurant. You know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
think we definitely need to have certain distinctions around that. Also, too, I think just being able to understand what makes us different. That was one of the things that I had set out for myself is although I make it very clear that I cook Trinbagonian inspired food, I wanted to travel the Caribbean to understand who am I as a Caribbean woman more.
Mm.
So when I went out to, Grenada, I was very enthused about learning about their rum and the types of sugar cane and the cocoa and how they grew it and how they processed it. And also understanding the elements of their dishes and the elements of how to make one of their national dish and what it meant to really be farm to table. And that's very different from Trinidad and Tobago. You know what I'm saying? In Barbados, what that looked like, in Martinique, what that looked like. It was very interesting to see the differences, and I felt that that was such a lovely thing to learn. Just for me, again, trying to define my story. I can't say that I am from the Caribbean and never traveled the Caribbean or I don't know anything about it. I think it's extremely important. I thought it was extremely important for me to understand that as a Caribbean woman, but more so when I'm saying, hey, I cook Trinidadian food, it's not to exclude any other Caribbean island. It's just showing pride in my country and where I'm from and how I like to cook and eat, Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And like really honoring the regionality and the
Yes.
history and like everything that comes before you with that.
Yeah. 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 That was really, really important.
Yeah.
But again, look, living in the US where you got to pay rent, I
Mm-hmm.
understand that a lot of places have to diversify their menu. And sometimes in diversifying the menu, sometimes it looks like a bastardization. And I
Yeah.
can't fight every fight. So I think again, it's lovely that people have the ability to showcase popular dishes from certain islands, but we definitely need to make sure people understand that there are distinctions within the food coming out of the different Caribbean islands.
Yes, yes. And it's just, I mean, it's a much more richer experience learning when you get to be
Yeah.
curious and keep learning about what makes each island different
Yes.
and unique too.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it does. And then also too, like people travel all the time. So it's not like if they don't know.
Yeah.
So I will always go rogue and be like, I don't need to, explain myself too much to people and all those things. But I also don't have a storefront.
Fair. Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking particularly like I grew up in a very small hometown in like remote Ontario. So it was like mostly white Irish settlers. And there's this one restaurant that was like a Caribbean food. And that was my in. Like that was in a place where it's mostly like potatoes, being able to like try new foods.
Yes.
And they're opened up a world of flavor and exploration that wouldn't have
Yes.
otherwise happened, right? So I
Yeah.
mean, obviously I continued to explore different cuisines, but
Yes.
it's one of those things where, yeah, as you said, like it's what intention is it for both the person creating and the person eating as well.
Yes. And that has always been, at the forefront of how I cook. What am I trying to convey? What, the positionality that I have, how am I using it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like how am I using it? And the older I get is the more that I want to call certain things out of, hey, like I've never interrogated why we did this, but why are we doing this? You know?
Yeah, yeah. And what
Yeah, so
stories behind that?
what's the story behind it? We do this, but what's the deal around it? Is it just family thing? Is it a subculture thing of where I grew up, or is it just like a all around thing? Is it just because of the socioeconomics of it all? Like so I've been really interrogating that. And then also too, I feel like so now I'm not cooking and we had this conversation. I'm trying to figure out how do I stay inspired versus
Mm-hmm.
falling to the paralysis? And I have just been thinking a lot more about not only the pride, but again, the distinction in certain things. And I've always been thinking about, the defining of the story, be it my own or that of, the Caribbean, and also how do we sort of, and this has also been at the forefront of what I think about and how I created menus. How do we, move forward looking back? So that's what
Yeah.
I've been thinking about mostly. I'm just kind of engaging with writers that, are from the Caribbean or have a concentration on, the Black American experience and, just kind of reading more about the foodways of, say, the American South when it came up to,
Mm.
the Great Migration and things like that. And just really understanding and learning more about these stories, that's really where I'm at right now when it comes to looking like moving forward, looking back when it comes to the foodways of Trinidad and the foodways of the Caribbean and my position in it all.
Yeah, it reminds me too, you had a line that you had posted on Instagram a couple weeks back where you're talking about food as a means of symbolic representation. So can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah. So that was my last pop-up. I partnered with my friend. She has a beautiful company and she wanted me to be one of the guest chefs. So that was at my last pop-up. And it was real symbolic for me because it was sort of the measurement of having the table for four, going back to work in corporate full time and coming back to cook for people and where I was with how I looked at myself, the craft and the food and the representation and sort of creating language for a food that I thought I didn't have language for. You
Oh,
know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
I was really like, hey, I know y'all came to like have a good time, but this was just like so much deeper for me to showcase to you guys how I've grown. Again, defining my story,
Yeah.
and some of the symbolism with that and who I was and who I am as a person. And I think that was very important. I wish I could be just like the friend who is like easygoing, but I'm definitely like always thinking.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I'm always thinking, and especially when it comes to food, right? I think
Hmm.
it's definitely so poetic and so lovely that I wanted to kind of move away of it just being romantic
Yep.
and more about this is how food has shown up for me coming up to 21 years living in the US. This is
Yeah.
how I'm able to not only revere and like have reverence, but this is how I'm able to console myself
Yeah.
with not being in Trinidad anymore, but also living and loving in the US. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you find, like even just the physicality of the practice helps with that as well?
It does, because as I said, like I'm an improv cook. So when I'm in the kitchen, it's like, oh, but what about this and what about that? And certain elements to it. And what if I do this layer first? And what if include this after and things like that? So I really have the ability to really think about it differently and not just do something just for the sake of it. And I think that's lovely because always been working on defining my story and I've been very intentional with what I do and how I go about doing it. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And it comes through like in anything that I've read or learned about what you create.
Yeah.
There's so much intention, there's so much thought
Yeah.
behind
I
it.
felt that to be very important because I didn't want to be a culture vulture for my own culture and say,
Mm.
well, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm doing that. And I'm really concerned with, not necessarily having receipts, but how can I back this up? You know what I'm saying? Making sure that I'm able to really have the ability to back up the things that I'm putting out on a plate. And that's really important for me. So I've always been very focused and intentional on when I was having my pop-up. So, when I was doing blogging and some of the content that I was sharing with people, I don't want people, well, not even people, I don't want it to be a part of my story that, I'm just out here doing stupidity,
Yeah.
or sharing, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Like the influencer.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. There's a big difference.
But also I think it goes to me being this operations person where I'm always thinking about the why, but before the goal. I'm just like, okay, so we're doing this lovely, but these are some of the things that we have to think about before we do that. These are some of the elements. Have we thought about this? Because at the core of what I do is, being people focused, making sure at the core I'm being, ethical, and I'm always keeping in focus, certain values. So I'm always thinking about these things as when I go about just like creating things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So Last question I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
You, again, as we talked about, there's a lot of intentionality in how you approach your work. And you had spoken a while back about creating meaningful words that echo Caribbean abundance. So, can you speak to how you ensure that this can be properly reflected through your work?
So, in Caribbean Abundance, I think a lot about Afrofuturism and moving forward and, the forward moving back of it all. And I think the alignment that I've been doing with other bodies that have a concentration of work in the Caribbean or in Trinidad or with Black foodways in the US, understanding myself more through literature written by people from the Caribbean. Right now, I'm like in the weeds of looking at cookbooks written like in the 80s and the 90s out of the Caribbean and figuring out some words from the lens of, the sons and daughters of the land versus, the visitors to the shores. So I'm kind of like in the weeds about that. And then just, again, aligning myself with people that want to understand themselves now and beyond, and what does that look like? Also, like drinking rum.
Yeah.
Drinking rum and liming and just enjoying company and just having stories be shared with people and just trying to live good with each other. You know what I'm saying? That's a big part of it. That is a big part of, just trying to move forward in all of my Caribbeanness as well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend, girl.
No, that's necessary part of life
Yes.
in my mind too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leigh-Ann. Do you mind
Yeah.
sharing where people can find you online if they'd like to learn more?
My website, leannmartin.com, and I'm only on Instagram at Chef Leigh-Ann.
Perfect.
I did delete like all of my content, but
I saw when I was doing my research.
I deleted everything. But no, I didn't delete. I archived everything. But yeah, people could still see content in my stories and, of things, to come this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leigh-Ann, for joining me.
Thank you for your time, Sarah. I'm such a big fan of Anthro-Dish, and I am going to look forward to all the offerings for the year to come.
That means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Anytime.
That was Chef Leigh-Ann Martin. I've linked her website and social media in the show notes below if you want to follow along and learn more. You can also find all this at our website at anthro-dish.com under episodes. Thanks so much for listening to Anthro-Dish Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like the show, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help get the word out. For more Anthro-Dish, you can find me at my newsletter, sarahduignan.substack.com, or follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, you name it. It's all at Anthro-Dish Podcast. Music production was done by Lucas Wojcicki at lucassound.com. Anthro-Dish is produced in partnership with the American Anthropological Association. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.